It was one of the most beloved shows in television history, and yet its cast kept leaving. MASH wasn't just a sitcom, it was a groundbreaking blend of comedy and heartbreak, war and wit. It redefined what TV could be. But behind the scenes, things were far from peaceful. Over 11 seasons, the show lost some of its biggest stars. Some disappeared without warning. Some left chasing bigger dreams, and a few walked away with deep regrets. One actor's exit led to a TV moment so shocking it silenced an entire nation. Another never even signed a contract and was gone before the writers could say goodbye. And while fans cried during the finale, several cast members had already made their own painful farewells long before the cameras stopped rolling. So, why did they really leave? Was it burnout? Jealousy? Broken promises? Or was MASH simply too big for anyone to carry for long? Today, we're uncovering the untold stories behind the exits, personal battles, behind-the-scenes tension, and the career moves that nearly ruined everything. This is the real reason why these actors left MASH. At first, McLean Stevenson had it all. As Colonel Henry Blake, he played the well-meaning, slightly bewildered commanding officer of the 407 7th. He wasn't just comic relief, he was the heart of the show's early seasons. Viewers loved his warmth, his timing, his subtle humanity. And for a while, it seemed like he'd be part of the MASH family for the long haul. But behind the scenes, McLean was quietly frustrated. While the show had started out as an ensemble, one actor was rapidly taking center stage: Alan Alda. Alda's Hawkeye wasn't just the lead, he was becoming the voice of the show, and eventually a creative force behind it. For McLean, that meant less screen time, fewer storylines, and the sinking feeling that he was being pushed into the background. He wanted more. And in 1975, he told producers he was done. McLean believed he could carry his own series. He had the charm, the talent, the name recognition. So he walked away from a guaranteed hit to launch The McLean Stevenson Show. It was a bold move, and a catastrophic one. The show flopped hard. A second attempt, Hello Larry, bombed even worse. Within a few years, he went from rising star to cautionary tale. But it wasn't just his departure that shocked audiences. It was how the show handled it. Instead of giving Henry Blake a lighthearted send-off, the writers made a stunning choice. They killed him off. In the final scene of Season 3, Radar enters the operating room and delivers one of the most chilling lines in TV history. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. The room fell silent. No music, no jokes, just stunned doctors and the sound of surgical equipment beeping in the background. Viewers were devastated. CBS was flooded with letters. Some praised the realism. Others were furious. But one thing was clear: MASH had just changed television forever. Years later, McLean admitted he'd made a mistake. He said, "I took myself out of the game," in a 1983 interview. And while he kept working, he never found a role that matched what he had walked away from. His character's death gave the show one of its most powerful moments. And in a strange twist of fate, the role he left behind became the most enduring part of his legacy. Next, an exit so quiet, it didn't even get a goodbye. If McLean Stevenson left with a bang, Wayne Rogers slipped out the back door without a sound. As Trapper John McIntyre, Wayne was one half of the duo that gave MASH its original comic spark. Alongside Alan Alda's Hawkeye, he helped shape the show's early tone: sharp, rebellious, and hilariously irreverent. Fans loved their chemistry. It was like watching a wartime odd couple with surgical tools and sarcasm. But behind the laughter, Wayne was growing restless. When he joined the show, he was told it would be an ensemble, equal footing for the core cast. But as the seasons went on, it became clear that MASH was becoming Hawkeye's story. Aldo was not only the face of the show, he was now influencing the scripts, the direction, and even the message. Trapper, meanwhile, was getting less and less to do. Wayne didn't like being reduced to the guy who just nodded along. He wanted substance, not sidekick status. So he did something unheard of. He simply didn't come back. He hadn't even signed a formal contract. He'd been working on a handshake deal. So when season 4 rolled around and the producers realized he wasn't returning, there was nothing they could do. No lawsuit, no negotiation. Just gone. And the show barely explained it. In the first episode of the new season, it's casually mentioned that Trapper was discharged while Hawkeye was away. No farewell, no closure. For fans, it was jarring. First Henry Blake, now Trapper? It felt like the soul of the show was disappearing, piece by piece. But Wayne didn't regret it. Unlike McLean, he didn't chase another sitcom. Instead, he pivoted, big time. Wayne became a wildly successful investor and financial commentator. He made millions. By the 1990s, he was a regular on Fox News' Cashin' In, discussing markets, policy, and wealth management. A Princeton history grad turned Hollywood star turned Wall Street guru. The man had range. Still, he never badmouthed MASH or Alda. In fact, the two remained friends. Alda once called Wayne one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. When Wayne passed away in 2015, Alda posted, "We made a pact to give each other a hard time for the rest of our lives. I'm sorry we won't have the chance." Wayne Rogers may have left without a goodbye, but his impact never really left the show or its fans. But not every departure was about contracts or creative control. The next one came from something far more personal. To millions of fans, he was the heartbeat of MASH. Gary Berghoff played Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed, teddy bear-clutching clerk with an uncanny sixth sense and an even bigger heart. Radar could hear helicopters before anyone else. He was sweet, loyal, and quietly heroic. In the chaos of the war zone, he was the glue that held the 407th together. But the actor behind Radar was quietly falling apart. Unlike most of the cast, Gary had played Radar before in the original 1970 MASH film. But the version he brought to the TV show was softer, more vulnerable, and deeply beloved. For years, fans saw him as irreplaceable. But behind the scenes, Gary was battling demons few knew about. He struggled with anxiety, perfectionism, and crushing exhaustion. The long filming days, the emotional demands of the show, and his own internal pressure to deliver a flawless performance were eating him alive. On top of that, he was a father, and the time away from his young daughter haunted him. Years later, he admitted, "Missing her childhood was a mistake I never stopped regretting." By season 7, the cracks were showing. Gary requested fewer appearances, lighter workloads, and more flexibility. The producers tried to accommodate, but it wasn't enough. His mental health was deteriorating, and he was simply burnt out. In season 8, he made the decision to leave for good. This time, MASH didn't let him vanish quietly. Radar got a 2-part farewell, Goodbye Radar. In the episodes, he returns from leave to find the unit in disarray. He tries to fix everything, like always, but realizes the war has changed, and so has he. His final scene is nearly silent. Radar walks out of the tent and leaves his teddy bear behind on Hawkeye's bunk. It was a simple moment, and utterly devastating. Viewers cried, the cast cried, and in many ways the innocence of the show walked away with him. After MASH, Gary made only a handful of appearances, including a failed spin-off, Walter, that never took off. He eventually left Hollywood behind, focusing instead on painting, wildlife conservation, and inventing. Yes, inventing. He held several patents, including one for a fishing tackle system. In a rare interview, he explained it simply. "I left for 2 reasons, my family and burnout. I wanted to pick up the pieces of my life." And who could blame him? But while Gary left for emotional reasons, the next actor walked away for a different reason entirely. He knew his character had reached a dead end. If there was one character every fan loved to hate, it was Major Frank Burns. Played with pitch-perfect snobbery by Larry Linville, Frank was the stiff, rule-obsessed, self-important thorn in everyone's side. His affair with Major Houlihan, his rivalry with Hawkeye and Trapper, and his utter lack of self-awareness made him a comic goldmine and the perfect target for ridicule. But as MASH evolved, Frank didn't. While other characters deepened, exploring trauma, vulnerability, and moral ambiguity, Frank stayed flat. He was always the joke, never the lesson. And Larry Linville knew it. He was a classically trained actor, capable of far more than just playing a cartoon villain. By season 5, he had had enough. He wasn't fired, he wasn't pushed out, he simply chose not to renew his contract. In his words, "I had taken the character as far as I could go with him." And honestly, he was right. Frank wasn't growing, and in a show that was becoming more thoughtful and emotional, that kind of one-dimensional role just didn't fit anymore. Larry didn't want to be stuck playing a caricature, so he walked away, with his head held high. The show, in turn, didn't give Frank a dramatic exit. There was no farewell scene, no final meltdown. He was written out off-screen, reassigned with a vague mention of a promotion. Just like that, Major Burns was gone. But his absence created space for something new, a more complex foil, a different kind of challenge for Hawkeye and BJ. MASH was no longer just about silly rivalries and practical jokes. It was about change, loss, and learning to live with both. Larry went on to appear in other shows and movies, but he never landed a role as high profile as Frank Burns. Still, he never seemed bitter about it. He knew what he walked away from, and why. Sometimes, the bravest thing an actor can do is leave before the role defines them too narrowly. And in Frank's place, the show introduced a new kind of rival, a cultured, complicated surgeon who would help redefine MASH's second act. When Major Frank Burns left, MASH had a choice: bring in another cartoon villain or evolve. Enter David Ogden Stiers. As Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, he was everything Frank wasn't: refined, intelligent, arrogant, and deeply layered. At first glance, Winchester was just another elitist snob, but Stiers brought nuance, turning what could have been a one-note character into one of the show's most complex and quietly heartbreaking figures. He wasn't there to be mocked, he was there to be understood. Unlike his predecessor, Winchester wasn't incompetent. He was a brilliant surgeon, a man of classical music and fine wine, trying to maintain dignity in the middle of a war zone. And beneath the sarcasm and superiority, there was something else: sadness, empathy, and a growing sense of disillusionment. David Ogden Stiers made the character unforgettable, not by demanding attention, but by revealing small human cracks in the Winchester's polished surface. And when it came time to leave, he did it differently. Stiers stayed with MASH until the very end. In the final episode, Winchester's closing moment was haunting.
teaching a group of Chinese POWs to play Mozart, and then watching them be taken away, their fate uncertain. It was one of the most poignant scenes in TV history. No speeches, no fanfare, just a man changed by the war in ways he couldn't fully express. After the series ended, Stiers declined to appear in the spin-off after MASH. He felt Winchester's arc was complete, and he didn't want to force a continuation. In his words, Winchester had said what he needed to say. In the years that followed, he reinvented himself again, this time as a voice actor. Millions of kids knew his voice without even realizing it. He was Cogsworth in Beauty and the Beast, Governor Ratcliffe in Pocahontas, and many more. A whole new generation appreciated his work even if they never knew his face. Then, in 2009, Stiers made another brave choice. He came out as gay, quietly, proudly. He said he had waited because he feared it might cost him roles earlier in his career, particularly with Disney. But he was finally ready to live openly. He passed away in 2018 from bladder cancer at the age of 75. Tributes poured in, not just for his work, but for the dignity with which he lived. David Ogden Stiers didn't just replace a role, he elevated it. But behind the scenes, there was someone quietly steering the entire direction of the show. And not everyone loved how much power he had. There's no denying it, Alan Alda was the face of MASH. As Hawkeye Pierce, he brought charm, wit, and emotional depth to the role. He could go from cracking jokes in the OR to breaking your heart with a single line. Audiences loved him, critics praised him, and over time, the show increasingly revolved around him. But behind the scenes, that rise to prominence created tension. By season 2, Alda wasn't just the star. He was a writer, director, and eventually the de facto creative force behind MASH. He shaped the tone, the scripts, and even the message of the show. What began as a punchy satire evolved into something far more introspective, largely thanks to his vision. For some, that was a gift. For others, it was suffocating. Multiple actors, McLean Stevenson, Wayne Rogers, and even Larry Linville, left the show after expressing frustrations about shrinking roles or a lack of creative input. Many felt as Alda's influence grew, theirs diminished. The ensemble that MASH had promised was starting to feel like a one-man spotlight. It wasn't just about screen time, it was about direction. The show became less zany, more moral, less gag-heavy, more message-driven. And while the quality arguably improved, not every cast member signed up for that shift. Still, no one could argue with the results. Alda guided MASH through its most acclaimed seasons, balancing humor with heartbreak in a way few shows had ever done. And while some cast members quietly resented the imbalance, few ever said it out loud. Alda remained widely respected, not just as a performer, but as a thinker. Even those who left on difficult terms never accused him of cruelty or arrogance. In fact, many later praised his intelligence, his drive, and his relentless dedication to the show's evolution. But with so much attention focused on Alda, one cast member quietly broke the mold. She didn't leave, she didn't clash, she transformed, and in doing so, she changed what women could be on TV. In the early days of MASH, Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan was little more than a punchline. Strict, uptight, and the butt of every joke. She was written as a walking stereotype, the nagging woman in a sea of men cracking jokes. Her nickname came from a crude gag in the original film, and for a while the TV show treated her the same way. But Loretta Swit had other plans. She wasn't just there to smile and scold. She wanted substance, and she fought for it. Over 11 seasons, Loretta transformed Margaret from a one-dimensional figure into one of the most complex, respected, and emotionally rich characters on the show. Margaret wasn't just hot lips anymore. She was a decorated officer, a brilliant head nurse, and a woman trying to hold her own in a brutal, male-dominated environment. Her journey was subtle, but powerful. She challenged the system. She demanded to be seen. And Loretta made sure the writers couldn't ignore her. As she once said in an interview, "I wanted her to be a woman of substance, not a joke, not a background character." And she succeeded. By the end of MASH, Margaret was no longer a foil. She was a force. She stood up to sexism, took command in the OR, and developed her own inner life beyond her romantic entanglements. She was one of only 4 actors to appear in both the pilot and the final episode. While others came and went, she stayed and evolved. Interestingly, as male leads departed one by one, Loretta remained a constant. She became the emotional counterweight to Hawkeye, BJ, and even Winchester. Her quiet strength gave the show balance, and her refusal to settle for a flat role made MASH better, deeper, and decades ahead of its time. In a series about war, pain, and survival, Loretta Swit made sure the women didn't just stand in the background. She made them unforgettable. And when the end finally came, it was unlike anything television had ever seen. After 11 seasons, countless surgeries, and more emotional gut punches than anyone expected from a sitcom, MASH came to an end. And it didn't just go quietly, it made history. The final episode, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired on February 28, 1983. Over 105 million people tuned in, making it the most watched scripted TV episode in American history. Even decades later, it's still near the top. Why? Because it didn't just wrap up a show, it gave closure to a generation. It was raw, emotional, and unexpectedly real. Every character got a send-off. Every goodbye mattered. Hawkeye, broken by trauma. BJ, reluctant to say farewell. Winchester, changed forever by war. Margaret, finally respected. The jokes were still there, but they hit differently now. MASH wasn't a comedy anymore. It was a memorial. And when it ended, it felt like the closing chapter of something irreplaceable. But TV executives, of course, couldn't let it go. After MASH launched that same year, with a few original cast members, Klinger, Father Mulcahy, and Colonel Potter, now working stateside in a veterans hospital. It tried to capture the same heart, but lightning didn't strike twice. The show started strong but quickly fizzled. Audiences missed the full ensemble, the chemistry, the soul of the original. Without Hawkeye, Radar, or the familiar backdrop of the war zone, it just didn't feel the same. After MASH was canceled after 2 seasons and quietly forgotten. But maybe that was for the best. Because MASH had already done what few shows ever do. It ended on its own terms, with grace, depth, and a final message that still resonates. Wars may end, shows may end, but some stories and some characters never really leave us. But as we look back on the actors who walked away, we're left with one final question. MASH wasn't just a show, it was a revolution. It dared to mix humor with heartbreak, war with wisdom, and comedy with conscience. It pushed boundaries, broke hearts, and redefined what television could be. But behind the groundbreaking scripts and unforgettable characters was a hard truth. Greatness always comes at a cost. Some actors left for bigger dreams. Some walked away for their own sanity. Others quietly disappeared, feeling overlooked or emotionally spent.
McLean Stevenson thought he could find more success elsewhere, and never truly did. Wayne Rogers vanished between seasons without so much as a goodbye. Gary Berghoff gave the show its soul, but paid for it with his mental health. Larry Linville left before his character became a parody. And David Ogden Stiers, he stayed long enough to deliver one of the most beautiful farewells in TV history, then bowed out on his own terms. Even as Alan Alda became the show's creative engine, not everyone was comfortable with the shift in power. And while many cast members left the spotlight, one woman, Loretta Swit, quietly stayed and transformed a once ridiculed character into a symbol of strength. They each left for their own reasons, but the irony? The roles they walked away from became the ones that defined their legacies. And that's the real story. MASH wasn't just about the cost of war. It was also about the cost of storytelling and the emotional toll it takes to bring something truly unforgettable to life. So now we ask you, which actor's departure hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories from the golden age of television, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because the real drama doesn't always happen on screen.